The certified letter sat on my son's desk like a bomb nobody expected to go off. I watched from the hallway of his real estate office, my hands steady even though my heart was pounding harder than it had in years. 61 years old, and I was about to blow up the only family I had left. But let me back up, because this story doesn't start with the letter. It starts with a Saturday morning in a kitchen that wasn't mine, even though I'd paid every penny for it. The marble floors gleamed under the California sunlight streaming through those expensive windows. Everything in this house screamed money. Money I'd earned, money I'd given freely, money that was supposed to bring us closer. Instead, it had become a weapon. Sabrina walked past me like I was invisible, her designer heels clicking against the tile like a countdown timer. Then she stopped, turned around, and said the words that changed everything. "You live in my house but don't clean," she snapped, her voice sharp as broken glass. My house. She'd called it her house. Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family. Enjoy the story. Now, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't throw the rag I was holding. I just smiled and said, "You're right." But inside, something shifted. Something cold and clear moved through me like ice water. I walked away from that kitchen knowing exactly what I was going to do. I was going to sell that $3.8 million house right out from under them. No warning. No dramatic confrontation. Just business. Here's the thing about being quiet your whole life. People think you're weak. They think silence means acceptance. They don't understand that sometimes the most powerful men are the ones who don't need to yell. My wife Clara used to tell me that before she passed. She'd say, "Franklin, your strength isn't in your voice, it's in what you do when nobody's watching." I thought about Clara a lot during those 3 weeks while my lawyer Hollings worked his magic behind the scenes. I thought about the house we built together with our own hands, before we had money, before we had anything except each other. Then I thought about a 61-year-old man being treated like he was nothing in his own property. And I picked up the phone. That night, after Eli and Sabrina left for some charity gala in Beverly Hills, I packed one suitcase. That's all I needed. One suitcase, my wedding ring, Clara's favorite vase, and the deed that said everything was about to change. I walked through those halls one last time, touching the marble banister, running my fingers along the walls I'd decided to transform into their dream home. The house smelled like expensive perfume and lemon polish. It didn't smell like home anymore. 3 weeks of normalcy. 3 weeks of watering the garden, fixing the gate, cooking Sunday dinners like nothing was happening. 3 weeks of being invisible in a house that was about to disappear from under their feet. The buyer came through private channels, cash offer, no questions asked, no delay. That's what money does. When you have enough of it, you can make things happen quietly, efficiently, without drama or negotiation. Then came the morning I walked into Eli's office. The receptionist handed me a certified letter, and I made sure it got to his desk before lunch. I didn't stick around to watch his face when he opened it. I didn't need to. I already knew what the word said: eviction notice. 30 days to vacate the property. The house had a new owner now, and that owner wanted them out. Simple. Clean. Final. What happened next would either destroy my relationship with my son forever, or teach him the most important lesson of his life. And honestly, I wasn't sure which one I was hoping for anymore. Eli called at 4 in the afternoon. His voice was shaking, confused, desperate. "Dad, what the hell is this eviction notice? You sold the house? Our house?" I could hear Sabrina screaming in the background, could practically see her face turning red with rage and humiliation. Part of me felt something, guilt, maybe regret, but it was tiny and getting smaller by the second. "It was never your house," I said, keeping my voice steady and calm. "It was always mine. My name on the deed. My money that bought it." I just let you two live there while you figured things out. There was silence on the end of the line, the kind of silence that feels heavy with everything left unsaid. I could hear Eli breathing, struggling to find words that would fix this, make it make sense, convince me I was wrong. Dad, she didn't mean what she said. She's been stressed about. I cut him off. Son, I'm not doing this. Not today. You've got 30 days to get out, and you've got my condolences for whatever comes next. I hung up before he could respond, before he could manipulate me with apologies or explanations. That's what family does sometimes. They use your love against you, twist it into something that looks like weakness. The thing nobody tells you about taking your power back is how alone it makes you feel. I drove to Santa Barbara that evening, found a quiet little house surrounded by orange trees, and rented it on a monthly basis while I figured out what the rest of my life looked like. The walls were simple, painted cream and white. There was no marble, no pool, no trophy features designed to impress people at dinner parties. It was real. It was honest. News travels fast in wealthy circles. Within a week, everyone knew what I'd done. The story got exaggerated with each telling. Some people said I was a monster, others called me a genius. Sabrina gave interviews to her friends, painting herself as the victim of a vengeful, bitter old man. She had the story written perfectly. The poor younger woman targeted by a selfish father-in-law, destroyed for one careless comment. Nobody talked about the months of small cruelties, the constant digs, the way she'd made me feel worthless in a home I'd built for them. Eli tried to fix things at first. He called every few days, showing up at my Santa Barbara place with groceries, flowers, apologies wrapped in guilt and obligation. I could see him struggling to reconcile the father he thought he knew with the man I'd revealed myself to be. But here's what he was learning. Kindness without boundaries isn't love. It's just weakness wearing a disguise. "Why won't you talk to me?" he asked one afternoon, sitting on my porch with iced tea I'd made him. The orange trees were heavy with fruit, and the breeze smelled like salt and possibility. "I need to understand why you did this." I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw the boy who used to ask me to teach him how to build things. Somewhere along the way, he'd let other people define his values. "I did it because I needed you to understand something," I said quietly. "Respect isn't something you owe people just because they're family. It's something you have to earn by treating others like they matter. And for 6 months in that house, I didn't matter. I was an old man in the way, a burden, a punchline. The words hung between us like a challenge." Sabrina filed for divorce 2 months later. Turns out, Eli's financial situation wasn't as stable as she'd thought, and she wasn't interested in riding out the storm with him. She wanted a man with money, not a man with potential. She wanted what I had represented, not what he actually was. The real estate market was brutal after the sale hit the news. Eli's clients started canceling. The same people who'd thrown parties at the Brentwood house suddenly didn't return his calls. This is what shame does. It spreads like a virus, infecting everything it touches. I watched from Santa Barbara, reading about his struggles in real estate blogs, watching his reputation crumble in the way that only happens in small, interconnected communities. Part of me wanted to call him, to smooth things over, to use the rest of my money to fix what I'd broken. That's what the old Franklin would have done. He would have swallowed his pride, admitted he was wrong, and tried to buy his way back into his son's good graces. But the new Franklin understood something fundamental. You can't love someone into respecting you. Then something unexpected happened. Eli stopped trying. He stopped calling, stopped showing up with groceries, stopped performing the role of the dutiful son trying to fix his mistake. Instead, he disappeared. Weeks went by without a word. I told myself I didn't care, that this was the point, to sever the relationship cleanly, to cut away the things that were poisoning me. But the truth was, I missed my son. I started working with a contractor on a renovation project in Montecito, just to stay busy, just to keep my hands and my mind occupied. Building things had always been my therapy. My father had taught me that when I was a boy, and I'd never forgotten it. Mix the concrete, hammer the nails, create something real and solid that lasts. It was medicine for a wounded heart. One afternoon, a truck pulled into the property I was working on. I knew that truck. I'd bought it for my son 8 years ago when he started his real estate business. Eli stepped out, looking thinner than I remembered, his face weathered by stress and insomnia. He was carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you might need this," he said, extending one toward me. I didn't take it immediately. I was suspicious, defensive, wrapped in layers of hurt I wasn't sure I was ready to unwrap. But then I saw his eyes, and I recognized something in them, the same thing I'd felt in my own chest for months. Regret. We sat on the edge of a concrete foundation, not talking for a long time, just letting the California sun warm our faces. Finally, he spoke. "I filed for divorce papers," he said quietly. "I also left real estate. I'm going to work with a contractor I know, learn the trade, actually build something instead of just selling it." I felt something shift in my chest, a small thaw in the frozen place where my love for him lived. "What about Sabrina?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "She's gone. The minute the money dried up, so did she. Turns out you were right about a lot of things, Dad. I just had to lose everything to see it." This was the moment I could have lectured him, could have said, "I told you so," could have used his suffering as currency in some ancient transaction between father and son. Instead, I handed him the coffee cup and said, "Your mother always said that some people need to burn down their entire life before they can build something real." We sat in silence for another hour, watching the construction crew work around us. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was something. It was the beginning of something. 6 months after the divorce finalized, Eli and I were working on a renovation project together. It was a small beach house, nothing like the Brentwood mansion, but everything about it felt honest and earned. We'd wake up early, work until the sun got too hot, then grab lunch at a local deli. We talked while we worked, about Clara, about business, about the things that mattered and the things that didn't. I watched my son transform in front of me. The arrogance that Sabrina had cultivated, that I'd been afraid was permanent, started to fade. He became thoughtful, humble, interested in the people around him rather than the status they could give him. He'd come to my Santa Barbara house on weekends, and we'd sit on the porch surrounded by orange trees, and he'd ask me real questions about real things. "Why didn't you just talk to me?" he asked one evening. "Why did you have to blow everything up? You could have just told me how you felt." I'd been waiting for this question since the day I hung up the phone on him. "I tried talking, son. For 6 months, I bit my tongue while your wife insulted me, diminished me, made me feel like I was nothing. Talking wasn't going to change anything. Sometimes people need consequences to understand the weight of their actions." He nodded slowly, absorbing this. "I get it now. You were teaching me." I put my hand on his shoulder. "I was teaching you that kindness without boundaries turns into weakness. That respect has to go both ways, or it's not respect at all. And that sometimes the best gift a father can give his son is letting him fail instead of catching him every single time." The house we were renovating sold for $500,000. It was a legitimate sale, a real project, something we'd built together using our knowledge and our sweat. Eli took his portion and started a small contracting business. He wasn't getting rich, but he was getting honest. That meant something. Meanwhile, word was getting out about what we were doing. Other clients started calling, asking us to renovate their properties. We turned down most of them. We were selective about who we worked with, who we let into our space and our process. This was different from before. This wasn't about money or status or proving anything to anyone. This was about the work itself. I started thinking about my will. Not because I was dying. I felt healthier than I had in years, but because I needed to know that what I built would last beyond me. I sat down with my lawyer and made changes. The bulk of my estate now went to Eli, but with conditions. He couldn't sell it unless he was in genuine financial hardship. He couldn't use it to impress people or build his ego. He had to use it to build things, to create things, to leave something real behind. Eli cried when I told him about the changes. Real tears, the kind that come from someplace deep and true. "I don't deserve this," he said. I looked at my son and saw the man he was becoming. "You deserve it because you understand what it means now. Money isn't freedom. It's just money. What matters is what you do with it and who you become while you're doing it." 2 years after I sold the Brentwood house, I got a phone call from a woman I didn't recognize. She introduced herself as a documentary filmmaker interested in our story. Apparently, the tale of the father who sold his son's house had made its way into various circles, and people wanted to understand the deeper meaning. I almost hung up, but something made me listen. "Why would you be interested in this?" I asked her. She explained that stories about family conflict, about power dynamics, about the consequences of entitlement, these stories resonated with people. They made people examine their own lives, their own relationships, their own capacity for gratitude and respect. I told her we'd think about it. But the conversation stayed with me. What had started as an act of vengeance, or what I'd told myself was justice, had become something bigger. It had become a lesson. And if our experience could teach people something about how to treat the people who love them, maybe it was worth sharing. Eli and I talked about it that weekend. He was hesitant at first, worried about being portrayed as a villain or a fool. But eventually, he agreed. We decided to participate in the documentary on one condition. It had to tell the whole story, not just the dramatic parts. The months of disrespect, the moment when I decided to take my power back, the painful journey of rebuilding trust and understanding. All of it. The filmmaker spent 3 months with us, filming at job sites, in my Santa Barbara kitchen, on the porch surrounded by orange trees. She recorded conversations between Eli and me, conversations that were sometimes difficult, sometimes tender, always honest. She interviewed contractors who'd worked with us, clients who'd hired us, people who understood the value of integrity and the cost of its absence. When the documentary aired, something unexpected happened. It didn't make me a hero. It didn't make Eli a villain. Instead, it started conversations everywhere about family, about boundaries, about the difference between helping someone and enabling them. People reached out to us with their own stories. Parents who needed to set boundaries with entitled children, children who'd lost respect for parents who gave too much. Eli eventually remarried, not quickly, not out of desperation, but when he met someone who valued the things he valued now. Her name was Maria, and she understood what he'd learned the hard way. They didn't have grand wedding plans or expensive parties. They got married in our backyard in Santa Barbara, surrounded by orange trees and the people who actually mattered. I stood beside my son, watching him make promises to a woman who would challenge him when he needed challenging and support him when he needed support. I thought about Clara, about what she'd taught me about strength and silence, about knowing the difference between the two. I thought about the old Franklin, the one who would have let himself be diminished and disrespected. And I was grateful for the man I'd become. That's the thing nobody tells you about hitting bottom. Sometimes you don't hit it alone. Sometimes you have to take someone you love down there with you so they can understand what real feels like. It's not beautiful. It's not easy. But it's honest, and that matters more than anything else. 3 years into the documentary's release, our story had taken on a life of its own. I wasn't prepared for how many people it would reach or how deeply it would resonate. Letters came daily, from mothers estranged from sons who wouldn't listen, from adult children finally understanding why their parents set certain boundaries, from people who'd been trapped in cycles of toxic relationships and didn't know how to break free. I remember one letter in particular. It came from a woman named Sarah who said she'd been in a situation remarkably similar to mine. She'd given everything to a family member, and they'd treated her like she was nothing. Reading our story, she realized she didn't have to keep tolerating it. She set boundaries. She took her power back. And miraculously, it worked. Her relationship with her daughter improved because finally, there was mutual respect. That letter changed something in me. I realized I'd been holding on to residual guilt about what I'd done to Eli, wondering if I'd been too harsh, too cold, too decisive. But Sarah's words reminded me that sometimes tough love isn't cruel. It's the only thing that actually works. It's the only language some people understand. Eli and Maria had their first child, a son they named Thomas. Holding my grandson in my arms at the hospital, I felt something settle in my chest that had been restless for years. This wasn't just about fixing things between me and my son anymore. It was about legacy. It was about ensuring that Thomas grew up in a family where respect flowed in both directions, where love wasn't transactional, where kindness had boundaries. I spent hours teaching Thomas the things I'd learned: how to work with his hands, how to take pride in simple things, how to understand that real value comes from within, not from what you own. Eli watched us together, often with tears in his eyes, and I knew he understood what I was doing. I was making sure the next generation didn't have to learn these lessons the hard way. The real estate community that had once shunned Eli started reaching out again. Not because they wanted his business anymore, but because word had spread about the quality of work he did, the integrity he brought to every project. He'd built a reputation on something that couldn't be bought or sold. He'd built it on being dependably, honestly human. One afternoon, I got a call from a news outlet asking to interview me about family estrangement and reconciliation. They wanted to know my perspective on whether my decision had been the right one. I almost declined, but Eli convinced me to do it. "Dad," he said, "there are people out there struggling with the same decision you made. They need to hear from you that it's okay to choose yourself sometimes." So I did the interview. And I didn't sugarcoat it. I told the truth, that selling the house had been about more than just real estate or money. It had been about reclaiming my own value. It had been about refusing to live smaller than I actually was. It had been about saying, through my actions rather than my words, that I mattered. The interviewer asked the question I'd been dreading. "Do you regret it?" I took a long pause. "No," I finally said. "I don't. And I think a lot of people in my position would admit the same thing if they were being honest. We're taught that family is sacred, that you have to forgive, that you have to keep giving even when you're getting nothing back. But that's a lie. Real family is built on mutual respect. Everything else is just obligation." That interview went viral. Suddenly, I was getting messages from people all over the country. People who'd felt validated by my words, people who'd needed permission to set their own boundaries. The documentary filmmaker called me laughing, saying the streaming numbers had tripled overnight. But with that visibility came complexity. Some people started attacking Sabrina, trying to track her down, sending her hateful messages. I had to make a public statement saying that wasn't what this story was about. It was never about punishing her. It was about teaching my son a lesson. And she'd already paid her price by losing the lifestyle she'd been chasing. I learned something important in those months, that telling your truth publicly means you lose some control over how that truth is received. Some people saw me as a hero. Others saw me as a cautionary tale about bitterness and revenge. The reality, as always, was somewhere in the complicated middle, and I couldn't convince everyone to see it my way. By the 4th year after selling the house, Eli and I had built something remarkable. Not just a business, we'd built a life philosophy, and people were noticing. We started getting invitations to speak at universities, family counseling centers, even corporate retreats about leadership and integrity. One speaking engagement changed everything for me. We were invited to talk at a wellness retreat focused on conscious parenting and family dynamics. I wasn't excited about it. I've never been comfortable in front of crowds, never been someone who enjoys the spotlight. But Eli was passionate about it, so I agreed. The audience was full of parents, therapists, and people working through complicated family situations. When Eli introduced me, he did something I wasn't expecting. He apologized, publicly, genuinely, completely, for not respecting me in his marriage to Sabrina. He talked about his blindness, his entitlement, his inability to see what was happening until his entire world fell apart. Then he said something that stuck with me. My father didn't just sell a house. He rebuilt my conscience. And I know that's going to sound dramatic to some of you, but it's true. He showed me that love isn't about always being there for someone. Love is sometimes knowing when to let them fall. When I got up to speak, I was emotional in a way I hadn't anticipated. I talked about the hardest lesson of my life, that being a good father sometimes means being willing to lose your son temporarily in hopes of saving who he could become. I talked about the difference between helping someone and rescuing them, about how rescue breeds dependency while real help breeds growth. A woman in the audience raised her hand during the Q&A. She was probably in her late 50s, and her voice shook when she spoke. I kicked my daughter out of my house 5 years ago. She was 23, living off my money, refusing to work or go to school. Everyone called me cruel. But I couldn't live with myself anymore, watching her waste her potential. Your story made me understand that I did the right thing. She started crying. Then other people started raising their hands, telling their own stories of boundary setting and family conflict and the messy, complicated path to reconciliation. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about Eli and me anymore. We'd tapped into something universal. After that event, Eli suggested we write a book together. I was skeptical. I'm a builder, not a writer. But he was insistent, and honestly, I was starting to believe in the power of what we'd learned. We worked with a ghostwriter for 18 months, going over our story again and again, drilling down into the emotional truth of what had happened and what it meant. The book came out to mixed reviews. Some critics called it a cautionary tale about how not to be a parent. Others praised it as honest and unflinching. It sold well enough that we ended up doing a book tour, and during that tour, something beautiful started happening. People would come up to us afterward with their own stories. A father who'd been harboring resentment toward his son for years finally understood why he felt so angry. A woman who'd been enabling her sister's addiction saw a path forward. A young man who'd felt disrespected by his parents began to understand that sometimes parents set boundaries not because they don't love you, but because they do. One night, after a particularly emotional book signing, I was sitting in my hotel room when I got a text from an unknown number. It was from Sabrina. My heart actually stopped. I hadn't heard from her in almost 5 years. The message was brief. I read your book. I wanted you to know I'm sorry for who I was. I understand now. I didn't respond that night. I sat with it, turning it over in my mind like a stone. The next morning, I called her. We talked for 2 hours. She told me she'd gone to therapy, done the work, understood her own issues with entitlement and control. She wasn't asking for forgiveness or access back into our lives. She was just acknowledging that she'd been wrong. At the end of the conversation, I told her something I hadn't expected to say. Sabrina, I don't regret what I did, but I appreciate you doing the work to understand why you did what you did. That matters. She cried. We hung up with something that wasn't quite peace, but it was close enough. I told Eli about the call. He was quiet for a long time. Do you think she's genuine? He finally asked. I think she's doing her best, I said. And I think that's all any of us can do. That conversation with Eli marked another shift. We'd moved from survival mode to something like wisdom, the kind you can only earn by walking through fire. 5 years had passed since I sold the house when I decided it was time to share something I'd never told anyone. At a book signing in Los Angeles, after the formal event had ended and it was just me and Eli, I finally said it out loud. "I almost didn't do it," I told him. "The night before you got that letter, I almost burned it." I sat in my apartment and held that deed in my hands, and I couldn't imagine actually going through with it. Eli's eyes widened. This was new territory. "What stopped you?" he asked. "Your mother," I said. I had a dream about Clara. She was standing in that kitchen with Sabrina, and she was watching how Sabrina talked to me. And in the dream, she just looked at me and said, "Franklin, why are you letting her make you small?" I woke up at 3 in the morning, and I knew I had to do it. This is the story that didn't make it into the documentary or the book because at the time, I wasn't comfortable acknowledging how much grief was still tangled up in my decision. But by this point in my life, I'd learned to be honest about the complicated mix of motivations that had driven me forward. The 6th year brought new complications I hadn't anticipated. Eli's contracting business had become wildly successful, and he started getting offers to expand, to bring on more workers, to scale up and eventually go public. Part of him was tempted. The entrepreneurial drive that had once pushed him toward empty status was still there, just aimed at different targets now. One evening, as we worked on a renovation together, we still took on small projects just for the joy of building. I addressed it directly. "You're thinking about scaling this into something bigger," I said. It wasn't a question. "Yeah," he admitted. "Part of me wants to build an empire. Show the world what we can do." I put down my tools and looked at my son. "Ask yourself why you want to do that," I said. "Is it because the work needs doing, or is it because you're still chasing that feeling of being important?" He was quiet for a long time. "Both," he finally said. "Maybe it's always going to be some of both." "Then be honest about that," I told him. "That's the only way you stay human. The minute you pretend you're doing something purely altruistic when you're actually driven by ego, that's when you start losing yourself again." Eli decided to stay small. Not out of fear or limitation, but out of choice. He could have been a bigger man in a business sense. Instead, he chose to be a better man in the personal sense. That decision alone told me everything I needed to know about how far he'd come. Then Thomas, my grandson, turned 8 years old. He asked to help us on a job site. Watching that kid learn to use tools, seeing his concentration, his pride in contributing, I felt something click into place. This was the point. This was what it had all been for. Not punishment or revenge or teaching Eli a lesson, though all of that had happened. It was about ensuring that this child, and his children after him, understood that real value comes from within, from what you build with your hands and your integrity, from how you treat people when nobody's watching. I started having conversations with Thomas about money, about respect, about the difference between being given things and earning them. At 8 years old, he was starting to grasp it. That's when I knew the cycle was breaking. That's when I knew the hard choice I'd made all those years ago had worked exactly the way I'd hoped. 7 years after I sold that $3.8 million house, I got a call from Eli that changed my understanding of everything that had happened. "Dad," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I need to tell you something. I've been in contact with a group of family therapists who are doing research on estrangement and reconciliation. They want to use our story as a case study for their work." I was hesitant. Our story had already been public enough. But Eli explained that this research could help families who were stuck in similar patterns. Could help parents understand when to push and when to back off. Could help children recognize entitlement before it destroyed their relationships. So I agreed. Researchers came to interview us separately, asking probing questions about our motivations, our fears, our moments of doubt. They looked at our relationship from every angle: psychological, financial, relational. Their preliminary findings were fascinating and unsettling in equal measure. They discovered that my decision to sell the house hadn't been as simple as a punishment or a teaching moment. Buried underneath all my conscious reasoning was grief. Real, raw, unprocessed grief over losing Clara. I'd been trying to rebuild something with Eli that I'd lost with her. I'd been unconsciously trying to recreate the value and respect I'd felt in my marriage to her. When the research coordinator told me this, I actually felt dizzy. Could my entire decision have been rooted in that much pain? Eli listened when I shared this realization, and instead of judgment, he showed compassion. "Maybe," he said, "that's exactly why it worked. You were operating from a place of genuine truth, even if you didn't fully understand it yourself." The research was published in a legitimate family psychology journal. It didn't name us, but details made it clear who we were. The study's conclusion was radical and beautiful. Sometimes family estrangement and consequences, when delivered with love underneath, can actually repair relationships that seemed beyond repair. But it only works if both people are willing to do the work afterward. I received letters from people who'd read the research and saw themselves in our story. A woman who'd cut off contact with her mother finally understood why her mother had made certain harsh choices. A therapist wrote to say the research had completely shifted how she counseled her clients about family boundaries. An entire school district implemented our story into their curriculum about emotional intelligence and family dynamics. By this point, I was in my early 70s. My health was still good, but I was increasingly aware that I wouldn't be here forever. This made everything more urgent. The time with Eli, with Maria, with Thomas, the work we still wanted to do, the wisdom we still wanted to pass on. One morning, sitting on my porch in Santa Barbara surrounded by orange trees that had somehow grown more beautiful with age, I realized something profound. My entire conflict with Sabrina, the decision to sell the house, the years of estrangement and reconciliation, it had all been necessary. Every painful part of it had led to this moment, to having a relationship with my son that was based on truth instead of performance, on respect instead of obligation. I called Eli and asked him to meet me. When he arrived, I handed him an envelope. Inside were documents transferring full ownership of the Santa Barbara property to him. "I want you to have this while I'm still here to see you enjoy it," I told him. "But there's a condition." He looked nervous. "What kind of condition?" "You have to promise me that you'll never let anyone make you feel small here. Not me, not Maria, not your friends, not your business associates. This is sacred ground because it represents what we built through honesty. I need to know you'll protect it." Eli took the keys, and he cried. But these were different tears than before. These were tears of gratitude and understanding and the deep relief that comes from knowing you've truly arrived at peace with someone you once couldn't communicate with. The final chapter of this story, at least the chapter I'm sharing with you today, happened 8 years after I sold that house. I was 72 years old, still working, still building, still learning. But I knew my time here was finite, and I wanted to tie up the loose ends. I did something I'd been avoiding for years. I went back to Brentwood. I drove up to the house, not to tour it or reminisce, but to close a circle. The new owners had completely renovated it. It looked nothing like the Brentwood mansion we'd lived in, and that was good. That house needed to become someone else's dream so it could stop being my burden. Standing outside those gates, I felt nothing but peace. The anger was gone. The resentment had dissolved. Even the vindication I'd felt for so long had faded into something simpler. Just the quiet satisfaction of knowing I'd made the right decision, even when it was hard. I called Eli and asked him to meet me there. When he arrived, I showed him the house and asked him a simple question. "Do you have any regrets?" He looked at the property for a long time. "No," he finally said. "I spent years resenting you for this, but now I understand you saved me from becoming someone I wouldn't like." That night, Eli and I sat down together and did an interview that was published widely. In it, we discussed everything: the anger, the justification, the journey toward understanding, the research, the therapy, the slow path back to love. We talked about what we'd learned and what we still didn't understand. We acknowledged that our story wasn't perfect, that it wouldn't work for every family, that some people might read it and think we were both wrong. But we also said this: if your story resonates with someone who's struggling with boundaries or entitlement or broken family relationships, then the pain was worth it. Then it all meant something. I'm now 74 years old. I still work when I want to, usually on small projects that bring me joy rather than profit. Thomas is 10 now, and he's already showing signs of being a builder like his father and his grandfather. Last summer, he built a birdhouse entirely by himself, and when he showed it to me, his face was filled with pride that had nothing to do with money or status. That's when I knew the cycle was truly broken. Eli and Maria had another child, a daughter named Sophie. Watching my granddaughter grow up in an environment where hard work is valued and kindness has boundaries, where love is shown through presence and action rather than material things, it feels like redemption. Not just for me, but for all 3 generations. People still ask me if I'd do it differently if I could go back. The answer is always no. That house needed to teach a lesson, and I needed to learn something about my own worth. The method was harsh, yes. Unforgiving, absolutely. But it worked. Sometimes the most important gifts come wrapped in consequences instead of pretty paper. I've learned that forgiveness isn't about erasing what happened. It's about understanding why it happened and choosing to move forward anyway. Eli and I didn't forgive each other for what we did wrong. We understood each other. And that's something much more powerful. The documentary that started all of this is still streaming. People discover it all the time and reach out with their stories. Some thank us for the courage to set boundaries. Others tell us our story pushed them toward reconciliation with family members they'd written off. That's the legacy I'm most proud of, not the house I sold or the money I made, but the impact of our truth on people we'll never meet. Last month, I got a letter from Sarah, the woman who'd written to me years ago saying our story helped her set boundaries with her daughter. She wrote to tell me that her daughter had just graduated from college, that they now had a relationship based on mutual respect, and that she wanted me to know that she credited our story with saving both their lives. That letter sits on my desk next to my wedding photo of me and Clara. They represent the same thing: evidence that love, real love, requires courage. Courage to speak truth. Courage to enforce boundaries. Courage to let people fail. Courage to rebuild when everything falls apart. If you're watching this story and you're in a similar situation, if you're struggling with boundaries, if you're enabling someone you love, if you're compromising your own dignity to keep the peace, I want you to know something. Your worth doesn't come from what you give or what you do or how much you're willing to sacrifice. Your worth is inherent. It exists simply because you exist. The moment I understood that, everything changed. The moment I stopped asking Sabrina to respect me and started demanding it through my actions, I reclaimed my life. The moment I was willing to lose my son to save him, we actually found each other. This story isn't about winning or being right. It's about choosing authenticity even when it costs you everything. It's about understanding that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is letting them experience the consequences of their choices. And it's about the miraculous possibility of redemption, not just for the person who made the mistake, but for everyone connected to them. As I stand here in the sunset of my life, looking back at everything that's happened, I can say this with complete certainty: I am exactly where I'm supposed to be. With my son. With my family. In a home filled with orange trees and the quiet knowledge that what we've built together will last long after I'm gone. And that, my friends, is worth more than any mansion could ever be. Thank you for listening to my story. If this resonated with you, if you found yourself seeing your own life reflected back at you, I want to hear about it. Leave a comment below and tell me your story. Tell me how boundaries changed your relationships or how consequences helped someone you love find their way back to who they really are. We're all connected through these struggles, parent and child, giver and taker, the person who's trying to hold on and the person trying to break free. Subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next story of love, family, struggle, and redemption. Because there are more stories coming. Stories of people who chose truth over comfort. Stories of families who rebuilt themselves from the ashes. Stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things when they finally decide their own worth matters. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Maybe it will help them set a boundary they've been too afraid to set. Maybe it will help them understand why someone they love did something that seemed cruel but was actually an act of profound care. Maybe it will simply remind them that they're not alone in their struggle. Thank you for being part of this journey. Thank you for believing that real stories about real people can change real lives. And thank you for reminding me, every single day through your messages and comments, that this story, our story, matters. Until the next chapter, take care of yourselves. And remember, your value doesn't come from what you give. It comes from who you are. Never let anyone make you forget that.